Our guest today, Joe Di Bacco, is Senior Director of Client Activation, Head of Client Affairs for Q4, an investor relations firm with a lot of public company clients. So Joe really has a good handle of what IR web pages look like these days. I'm Brock Romanek, today on Zippy Point. So Joe, IR web pages, one of my favorite topics, and you're the master, so thanks for joining us. And so we're going to start out looking at some examples of what are good IR web pages that you recommend that people check out, and what's your first example?
Well, I guess when we talk with clients about web pages, obviously there's a subjective and an objective element to assigning something as good. In terms of objective, I think clearly content and information is what we anchor a lot of those comments around. Rider is definitely a great example when we like to point out to clients. From an audience perspective, I think what this site does really well, certainly as an investor, is within this section here about Rider. So in particular, as I said, data and content is really what's important. I think Rider does an excellent job of really laying out what it is they do, breaking down their business. They talk about their strategy in very kind of interactive ways with infographics and tables and charts, core values, all of this material. It's one long scroll, but it allows you to kind of click through at your pace. And it really easily summarizes for an audience why invest, which is a key message that I think any good IR site aims to achieve. And despite the fact that it sounds maybe obvious, not all sites, in my opinion, do it as effectively. And I think the one thing that stands out here is clearly this is something that was done thoughtfully and over time. It's not just a couple of bullet points pulled together, at the time that they were building the site. This is clearly a core part of their communication platform, and it definitely reflects well when they put it all together in their IR site. So I think that's one example. Etsy.
I'm most surprised that more companies don't have the case, their business case for why their company is a good investment. I think that's a great tab and good information.
Yeah, and it's certainly becoming more prevalent. I mean, certainly that's a huge, best practice that we push with our clients. I think one of the big barriers typically is that content. While the information is out there, in some cases the IR team that we're working with hasn't had the time or capability to kind of distill that into a couple of sound bites or infographics for their site. And so it's got bridge from kind of the dry information buried in a document to those quick sound bites that can show well on a site. But that's starting to become a good trend, and certainly one we're fully pushing with all of the sites we're involved with. I've got another site up. I think Etsy is another great example. One of the things I think they do very well, certainly, is incorporating their brand. Not that that's paramount to an investor, but it does create a great experience as people move through the site. The key here is how they bring forward their content. So one of the things we always talk about as well is kind of eliminating that barrier, and screen share opportunities such as this or slide viewers, which allow a user to literally walk through a PDF document without downloading or saving. An excellent way to show a presentation, an investor presentation, and the fact that this is right on their homepage. Again, a very tidy summary of their investment thesis, key points that are very quick to understand and an investor can latch onto. And then just visually, right? They have videos that they include down here that give you a sense of their brand and what they represent. Additional, stories about their business and operations. So in one quick scroll, anyone looking for information certainly will start with the details and kind of the key facts around earnings, et cetera. But with very little effort, they get into a lot more of the story. And I think narrative, even though that's maybe traditionally held in the marketing realm, I think it's definitely key on an IR site as well. You always want to be building that narrative and keeping everyone apprised of what you're doing now and kind of what you see as the future.
Yeah, and forcing people to scroll 10 or longer years ago was sort of disfavored, but now that mobile's become so important and that's the way a lot of people are navigating, scrolling is good.
You got it. Yeah, and it's funny because obviously in our last few years, there's always that innate hesitation around the fold, that notion that anything below that, imaginary line on one view of your monitor, but you said it, because of scrolling becoming such a natural part of how we interact with media on our phones and tablets, it's actually a lot more fluid and free to scroll than it is to click and reload, click and reload. So people are becoming much more comfortable with that. Another great site is Salesforce, actually. Not surprisingly, maybe, but one of the things that they do well, very much like the other sites, is kind of how they structure their information. One of the things that I really like, which is a small thing, really, but extremely effective, is this button, which is persistent in their navigation. And what it does is it allows you at any point to immediately kind of access their presentation, their most recent investor presentation. Now, you know, against what I just said, I think it'd be an even better approach if this was a embedded slide viewer mechanism, which is certainly something that is always available as an upgrade, whereas this loads the PDF in full. But the fact that you're always able to have that at a click, regardless of what you may have come to the site for, I think is very important.
So Joe, what type of display do you like for companies when they offer archives of past investor events, earning calls?
Yeah, so that's definitely a question we get a lot from clients, is how to best bring that material forward. Obviously, traditional wisdom was that the website is really just a filing cabinet, a drawer of archive materials in a digital format. And we've long since moved away from that, and certainly encourage our clients to do the same. I think anything that can capture information at a glance, but also provide a quick link or access to more depth in terms of historical information is really the way to go. I'm going to go ahead and share. One good example of this is Salesforce. So again, another thing that I think they do really well on their site. They have a results center, which basically allows a couple things to happen all at once. So first and foremost, you've got a great summary table here that takes you through all of the related earnings material, segmented by type, and the ability to easily scroll through the years. And each one of these items, is a direct link to the document. You scroll down and you see that not only do they give you that kind of summary at a glance view, but they summarize very clearly their most recent earnings. So a bullet point list taken from the masthead or the summary there of a press release earnings, as well as the specific items related to that earnings, and the ability to jump to the most recent 4. Couple that with a quick update of what's coming up and sort of a list of annual reports. So you can really see that both visually and functionally, this page is an excellent way to take a whole lot of information and make it readily available, easy to navigate, intuitive to find, basically, what we would consider certainly a best practice. A lot of clients, I think I showed Etsy as a previous example, on a landing page, one thing we always talk about is having a very quick access to the latest earnings as a entry point. Certainly that's typically what most people are after, but coupling that, sort of that widget of most immediate with something much more robust like Salesforce is definitely a great way to.
So Joe, what about the annual report and the proxy statement? What formats of those documents do you think companies should offer? A multitude of them, or is just a PDF sufficient?
Yeah, so I mean, maybe not surprisingly, given the space that we're in, I think one of the first areas I would look to suggest for clients is web-enabled HTML format. A lot of the content in those documents is heavy, and there's a lot of it, but taking highlights, just like you would for any other document or any other story you want to tell, and making them into a format that is easy to move through and a little more engaging, I think just further kind of makes the effectiveness of those tools a lot more useful. I've got a couple of examples I can show. So in particular, looking at something here, which is a product we have, but typically, essentially, this is a online annual report. And what you can see here is, we've structured it in a thoughtful template, which basically highlights key elements of the annual report, such as, of course, the access to the letters from the executives, direct information around forward, plans and strategy, and then financial highlights. All of the details that are typically 1 or 2 layers deep within a document. If you were to look at it on a website, we've surfaced and essentially created a little microsite experience. So as a user or investor goes through this page, they are taking all of the key highlights at face value. So all of the key information that a user may look for is directly available to them on the site. And the fact that you get to, imbue the document with your brand in terms of imagery and kind of the design and layout. Also helps to reinforce that kind of company feel. Typical information that you would see, as I said, in addition to financial results, stories you could have portraying your brand. Of course, here, people list showing your executive board or directors. So again, very much a very useful way to do that. State Street is another example, showing you, again, a very similar experience, but this is the State Street version. So you get their branding, bold messaging. Common anchor elements, of course, are going to be the message from your CEO or your executives, as well as a high-level summary. In every case, we certainly encourage there to be highlights in financial form. Again, this gives you ability to take those typically flat numbers and give them life with some infographics. You can use charts, you can use tables, a lot of different ways that give information at a glance, all with the ability still to dig in and give people much more fulsome numbers if that's what they're looking for. So I think from an annual report perspective, that works well. But what we've recently done is started to apply those same principles to proxy reports. So in this case, interactive proxies is another, I wouldn't say emerging, but certainly an uptrending format. And just like we talked about with annual reports, this allows you to take relevant information and present it in a digital format so that you have a lot of the information available at a glance. Such items as, items of business, so people can get a quick sense of what will be up for vote. All of these will link directly into the primary document. It includes a direct interactive view of your directors. You can filter and sort based on things like tenure, age, independence, and this gives people kind of a little more of a intimate view, so to speak, of who they're dealing with and what the composition of that board looks like. Additional features at the bottom here, quick navigation, so you can look at any type of comp analysis, highlights of the proxy, and even how to vote, right? So this is obviously key. This explains the details in terms of a phone number or link, all of the information that is critical and necessary in these documents, but coupling that with a format that makes it a lot more engaging. And frankly, as we all know, everyone is digesting all sorts of information digitally now. So why create that extra barrier with a paper-based document when you can have something that works just like the websites they're looking at every day?
So what about video? I'm all about video, of course, now that I'm running a video platform. How do you think video might be used as a way to amplify a message or provide the message in the first place?
It's been proven time and time again to be an extremely effective format. The ability to see human or visual kind of reference points, tying things together is always going to be strong. One of my colleagues here talks about an educational journey a lot. That's kind of what our IR team working with clients will do, and encourage them to build that narrative and make it a journey over time that you are taking your investors on. And if you kind of consider it in that light, videos is an excellent way to kind of take that information and create chapters almost of that journey, where you can film a little, vignette or some piece of summary material about your thesis, about various other aspects of your proposition. And that does a couple of things. I mean, first and foremost, it creates consistency in how you deliver a message. You can have visitors and investors kind of get a feel for the company and the people behind it. And it also gives you a plan to have content that scales. I think one of the challenges all websites have, IR no different, is you certainly want to be able to provide new material and content to users so that when they visit the site, they're not seeing the exact same thing they saw 7 months ago. Obviously, financials and historical records don't change, but if you are deliberate and planning a release of these little videos that are built in a structured way, you're always releasing kind of the next update or the next part of the story, and that actually pulls visitors in, that keeps your investor audience engaged. And I think it's a great way to leverage video in a pretty low impact. I mean, we're seeing now, certainly with a big shift to people working remote, that you don't need to have super slick production values to make a valuable video. There's tools that are very accessible that allow for quick, effective videos to be made, and really the message remains key. So as long as you are able to craft that, the video is just a great enabler.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I've learned myself how to edit videos just in
For
the last few
sure.
months, and it's shocking. So what about social media? Maybe I'm wrong, but based on my own anecdotal experience, it seems like IR departments having their own social media channels, that really hasn't grown that much, or maybe even retrenched. Are they using corporate communication channels, or is social media just not being used for IR purposes these days?
Yeah, we see the same thing. I mean, obviously, social media on websites is typically, the burger and fries kind of analogy in general sense when you're looking maybe more so from a corporate or marketing perspective. When it comes to an IR audience and an IR, purpose, I think a lot of the reason there's hesitation, based on my experience and conversations with clients, is a couple of things. First of all, I think there's a risk of inadvertently, divulging material information, either too soon or incorrectly. You don't want to engage in that. There's also the need for constant attention. As I'm sure you're well aware, once you engage and initiate a social channel, the absence of a response can be taken to mean a response, or allows for the community to jump in and weigh in. And I think when it comes to an IR site in particular, where there is certainly a dedicated attempt to manage a message, you really don't want that to be a collaborative experience with the community. So I think a lot of IR professionals defer in that social realm to their corporate sites and let the brand owners manage that. And there's value in a conversation when it comes maybe to a brand, but when it comes to investment and financial thesis, it's a little more challenging. And frankly, I think there's also the requirement for constant attention and updates, so that can be onerous. There's certainly more than enough to do on the IRO's plate when it comes to keeping a message alive and well on social media.
Yeah.
But yeah, that may change. I don't know. We just haven't seen it for a number of years, so I'm not sure it'll happen.
And in a way, along those same lines, just having contact information for the IR officers on an IR webpage, I think is a little bit more common of a practice in Europe, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, that seems to reflect our experience as well. We certainly work with clients in Europe, and that tends to be customary. In talking to some of our clients here, as well as some of the converted clients who are now employees here at Q4, I think one of the concerns that was raised is the notion of, again, the scarcity of time and making sure that the IRO is focusing on important matters. Not to suggest that incoming requests aren't important, but there's no real vetting process, right? So having a personal email kind of can add a lot of noise to your channel, to your inbox. Whereas typical practice, which is what we tend to see of a central inbox, allows there to be almost a triage that can happen. It allows for multiple people to share the inbox if needed. It can easily be managed by communications as well as finance or IR in case there are inbound requests that are completely unrelated to IR. So I tend to see it as more of just a practical concern as opposed to a strategic one, but that tends to be the reason from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, with LinkedIn, you can always probably do a search, find an IR officer for a particular company on LinkedIn, connect with them. And then
that's right. And it adds that one little barrier so that anyone who's truly looking to have a meaningful conversation will find the right person. And all of the spammers or kind of just mass broadcasters obviously don't take up space in your already busy world.
So in closing, what kind of, are there any cool things you're seeing out there that might be a harbinger of something that might become a common trend, or just some companies,
Yeah, I mean,
out?
cool for sure. That tends to venture into the realm of design and kind of layout. And there's always great examples, but in terms of meaningful trends that are starting to emerge, I don't think this is breaking new ground, but I think as you've noted and has been discussed before, ESG continues to be a huge component. What we're seeing is varying levels of involvement from the IR clients we work with, whether they are contributors to the message, whether they are just someone who delivers it, or it exists completely outside IR. But one of the things we're encouraging and we're starting to see is that that is becoming a lot more entangled in the IR space, and rightly so. I've got a couple of great examples that I can show you. What I'm looking at here, a couple of great clients who use their IR space in order to really drive home their message around ESG. So this is Wendy's. Nothing complex in terms of how it's structured, but just very simple summary, videos, and each of the segments drilling down directly into how it is that their company lives these values. So again, it's not so much that they've taken great lengths to define or create material that is unseen or unheard of, I guess. It's just that they've tied that so nicely into their overall messaging around their investor site. Salesforce does the same. You can see kind of they have another section which is dedicated to their environmental and social practices. And as you kind of scroll down, it gives you direct access to their policies, their impact reports, visual reports that are created with the same care and attention that would have been typically associated with annual reports and that sort of thing. So just the fact that this is becoming more prevalent, I think is a great indicator. And in terms of messaging to others, it's always something we talk about, owning that. And we're definitely seeing an increase in terms of investor interest in this material. I certainly don't need to tell you or your audience that. So it's always a wise thing to give people information before they have to ask for it.
Yeah, I'm not going to be surprised at all within the next 10 years if the ESG section of a corporate website is larger than the investor section. They're broken out, and that even the right now there's a duplication where lawyers who typically draft the proxy statement are being called upon to draft the sustainability report, the ESG report. But one day I think it's too much for one person to handle, and it's
for sure. And the depth of specialization and kind of ownership is going to be such that you're going to want dedicated people on that, right?
Yeah.
And now people have the ability to separate themselves a bit. To your point, in a couple of years, it probably will be table stakes. So all the companies that get on board quick and can make that an effective part of their site now are definitely going to benefit from that.
Well, thank you so much, Joe. I'm so grateful for what you've done for your clients to bring them in the modern days with IRO web pages, because at first, the first decade was pretty bad, but it's definitely gotten a lot better. And thanks to companies like Q4. Thanks very much.
No problem. Thanks so much, Brock. It was great chatting with you.